Well, good morning. I want to add my welcome to you. It's good to see you all this morning as we're gathered in worship. I'm especially glad to be back with you. I was here last Sunday. It was Youth Sunday, and we were blessed in such a magnificent way by our Director of Youth Ministries and by our youth who participated in the service. Kat Bear, our Youth Director, and Chris Vardy gave our sermon, and the youth presented our service, led us in worship, and it was a great worship experience. And I'm glad to be back with you and starting this new sermon series called Timeless Wisdom. Timeless Wisdom. It's really focusing on the wisdom literature in the Bible. Most of the wisdom literature is found in the books of Psalms and Proverbs, Job, a Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, in the Hebrew Scriptures, but it's found scattered throughout the Hebrew Scriptures and then picked up again, of course, in the New Testament as well, in the teachings of Jesus and in other writings. And so today we've heard from Psalm 90 and also from the Gospel of Luke, one of Jesus' parables. And in this series, we'll be looking at the wisdom literature and what it has to say to us today. Today, our theme is Count Your Days. Count Your Days. It's especially at this time for me, I think, especially poignant to think about counting days because this coming Saturday is the 15th anniversary of my appointment here as senior pastor of this great church. 15 years. Where did it go? 15 years. Yesterday, when we were texting back and forth as a family, we get lots of pictures, as you can imagine, of all the grandchildren and all these texts. And one of our daughters texted a message that said, "They're growing up too fast," and there was kind of a frowny face. Now, is she sad that they're growing up? Of course not. But what's the sort of sadness and joy mixture that she was experiencing? It's what we all experience as time goes on. I was thinking about the old Jim Croce song written in 1972, and then later when I was in high school after the song came out, a couple of years later. But it was still a popular song, and I was thinking about when that came out, I had no idea really what that meant, this idea of saving time in a bottle. Why would anybody need to save time in a bottle? We have all the time we could ever want. Lots of time. Immeasurable amount of time. And of course, now I know that's not true at all. That days are countable. And now that I am less than a year and a half away from leaving behind the decade of being able to say I'm 50-something, I'm more and more aware of this wisdom. Teach us to count our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. The words of the psalmist, Psalm 90. Teach us to count our days. Because our days are countable. They're not infinite. They're finite. And so we have this wisdom of learning to get in touch with that, to count our days, and that matters a great deal. I was reading this kind of meditation or devotional in which the author was thinking about time and thinking about the passage of time and about life. And he recounted how he went to a cemetery in a city that he was visiting because it was a beautiful park, as many cemeteries are, just beautiful parkland. And he was walking through this city cemetery and fascinated with the history there. And he noted that there was an unusual feature in the very center of this cemetery that he had never seen in a cemetery before. It was a clock tower, and it stood tall right in the center of the cemetery. And wherever you were in the cemetery, he said, you could see that clock tower, and you could see at least one of the faces of that clock at all times. And he pondered that. why would you need a clock tower in a cemetery? And then the clock began to chime. And he said, suddenly the sound of that chime was as if it had words to say, speaking the words, remember that time is a gift from God. And we are all given this gift of time. Those of us everywhere, including those who are at rest in this place. It's a gift. Use it wisely. Use it wisely. Use it wisely, the chimes seem to say to him. Teach us, O Lord, to number our days, that we may gain a wise heart. Teach us to number our days. Can you imagine if you had a bank that put into your account every day $1,440? But at the end of every day, if there was anything left in the account, it went away. But every morning you get $1,440. What would you do? Would you make sure that you used the $1,440? That you did something with it? Because you know that you get it just for that day and it goes away. Well, there's a sense in which that's how time is for us. We're all given 1,440 minutes a day. And that's precious. In fact, when we speak of time, don't we even speak of it in the same way we talk about money? We invest time, we save time, we waste time. We spend time. In fact, we even say time is money. But time is even more than that. Time is even more precious than money, because we all know that all the money in the world can't even buy another minute or second of time. It's precious. So this ancient wisdom that comes to us, teach us to count our days, to know that they are numbered, and thereby gain a heart of wisdom, a wise heart. Jesus picks up on this in the Gospel of Luke, in that parable we heard a moment ago. It's usually called the parable of the rich fool. This man who has success in his farming, and he doesn't have enough storage space in his barns, and so he tears down his barns and builds bigger barns and bigger and better barns so he can store more and more. And all the time he's saying, in essence, you know, one of these days when I get all this set, I'll really be living one of these days. And then it says in our translation, the Common English Bible we heard a moment ago, it's very straightforward. God says to him, tonight you'll die. Now in some of the other translations, it's translated a little bit more, tonight your soul is required of you, or your life is required of you. But then the message is, and then whose will all this be? And then Jesus said, such as it is with those who hoard riches for themselves, but are not rich toward God. Now listen carefully, this is not a parable saying that he is a bad guy because he's rich. What Jesus says is it's this way with those who enrich themselves and are not rich toward God. It is a parable about how we manage resources, but it's also a parable about how we view our days, our time. Isn't it? So I want us to think about that this morning for these few minutes before we come to the Lord's table, and then when we go from this place, and think about what it means to count our days, what it means to be rich toward God, what it means to have a heart of wisdom. Well, it means, first of all, that if we are rich toward God, then it means we live our lives, we count our days knowing that life is headed somewhere, that we come from God and we go to God, that God becomes the center of our living, that we think every day about what God would have us do. Every day we relate to God, we pray, we place God in the mix when we're making decisions and when we're relating to other people. God is there, and we acknowledge that God is there, and we know that our lives come from God and go to God. We are rich toward God. We're rich toward God. We count our days. We have a heart of wisdom. When we have a heart of wisdom, when we count our days like that, we invest our time in that which enriches our lives and makes our life better. Years ago, Michael Medved, the movie critic, was speaking on a college campus, and he was talking about movies, of course, and he was talking about the movies that had the greatest impact on his life, the movies that had enriched his life. But he used that as really kind of a starting place to talk about how we use time. And he said to that group that when he looks back on those movies that really enriched his life, he said, the investment of my time to watch those movies was worth it. But he said, I also think about all those other movies that where I invested time, and it wasn't worth it. I think about those activities that where I've invested time, and it was worth it because they enriched life and made it better. And I think about those activities where I invested time that were not worth it. And he challenged those students to think about their use of time, to count their days, and to gain a heart of wisdom. When we are rich toward God, when we count our days, when we gain wisdom from that, then we know that we invest ourselves in ways that are life-giving, that make life better. And not just for us, but for others and for our relationships with one another. You know, it's kind of trite now to say, because it's been repeated so many times, but it's just true. And that is, almost no one at the end of their lives thinks, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. You know? What are they usually saying? I wish that I had spent more time with the people I love. Investing my time in the people that I love, my family, my friends. Investing my time in a way that makes life better for other people. To be rich toward God means that we use all the resources that we have in ways that are life-giving, including our time. I look in this congregation, I just look around this morning very quickly, and I see so many of you that I know give your time in mentoring and reading to kids, in making our public schools better, in treasuring the gift of education and making it available to everyone in every way that you can, and not just standing by and watching, but participating in that. I think about the people in this room who go to First Street Mission or who serve in some other way people that are most in need, investing the most precious gift you have, the gift of time. Those who teach our children in the church and elsewhere, who are giving the most precious gift you have, the gift of time. To be rich toward God is to give that gift in just such a way. And to count our days, to gain a heart of wisdom, to be rich toward God, is to be able to say every day, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day. It's to live in the present. I confess to you that my lifelong struggle has been very much like the man in the parable. I've always been looking forward to the next thing, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we make plans and we have ambitions, we have goals, of course. But what if you're waiting for that time to be the time you're really going to live? When I get everything just like I want it, boy, when I get that driver's license, man, I'll be really living. When I graduate from high school, I'll really be. When I graduate from college, when I get the master's degree, the doctorate, the next job, whatever it is, that notion of sort of putting off living to some future time is something that can rob us of the present. I've experienced that. I confess to you, it has been, living in the past has not been my issue. Living in the future has been too often. But then also there is that tendency to look back and say, wow, I wasted time, or I didn't. But you can't live life back there either. Life is lived in the present. Teach us, O Lord, to count our days, to know that they're numbered, and to live life in the only place we can live it, in the present. When we are rich toward God, we live life in the present, knowing that life is headed somewhere. We go from God, we go to God. A few years ago, there was a woman who turned 100, and that's much more common now, more and more common all the time, to have centenarians among us. But she was being interviewed by a young reporter who asked the question, what was life like in your day? And she looked at him with a smile and she said, what do you mean? This is my day, she said. I love that answer. She has gained a heart of wisdom. And she said, this is my day. Today's the day. So my prayer for you and for me is that God would teach us to count our days in such a way that we live today, in such a way that we invest our time in ways that are life-giving for us and for others, and that build community, that we would invest our time in ways that make the world a better place, that we would be rich toward God. Amen.